those of you who will know that the reasons why we cover conservative homes so often is because, well, I've said before, this is the place where most conservatives think that they can put out their, well, nonsense and get a safe pass. But if anything, especially even on conservative home, you've been seeing increased pushback against a lot of their articles, especially down in the comments. And just last week, we went over three um, William Atkinson articles. Like I say, we did one about trains, one about the fact that Sunak had to admit that he was losing, that he had to bring in super austerity, and then of course we did one for the Pony Club as well. Like I say, links down below to go and join that, and you can go view it yourself. But today, once again, we are covering our favorite T-boy, Will, because, as I've said, there has been a suspicious amount of almost nothing of Brexiteers about joining the comprehensive Pacific trade, the whatever, I've already misnamed it, but we'll just call it the Pacific Partnership just for easiness. They've already messed up, I think, massively, because there's so many things wrong with joining the Pacific Partnership, which goes against the whole almost singular theory at the heart of Brexit. And of course, that was sovereignty, the idea that no foreign government should be able to influence, create, or have put upon us foreign law that our parliament did not agree to, which again is completely wrong because parliament did very much agree to all those EU laws. However, joining the Pacific Partnership, like I say, it's in the very deal. Not only are there secret courts, which companies can use us to force to lower our standards and regulations. We are not, as I've said before, the Pacific Partnership is not everyone is playing at level playing field and we can go up from there. It's all about accepting everyone else's standards, even when they have lower standards than you. This gets rid of a lot of tariffs, and as we've said before, if you are a Pacific one of those companies that is in the Pacific Partnership and your home nation is in there, you've lost all the tariffs. Why invest in the UK when you can maybe return home, pay where you pay your workers next to nothing, and export even more of your product into the UK for even bigger profits? Like I say, as we've said before, us being in this deal is going to have a lot of negative consequences because it has destroyed many of the Brexiteer key talking points about sovereignty, about what globalism was, again, complaining about globalism and sort of protectionism that apparently was bad in the EU, but we were going to do it for ourselves and that was going to be good. But instead, as we said, they were talking about global Britain, which completely undermines the whole leveling up thesis. Like I say, we'll get into it, but yeah, as always, he seems to be the only conservative actually talking about the CPTPP. And I think once again, it's worth covering from, again, looking at a conservative viewpoint. So we're going to have a look at what Will Atkinson has had to say about the UK joining the CPP. And like I say, he's not exactly, or at least he comes across, should we say, not that overly enthusiastic about it, which is not surprising. But again, he is an avid Brexiteer. Part of his history, reason why he got assigned to Conservative Home, and part of his job was because he was a very, very prominent Brexiteer supporter and campaigner back in 2016. So let's go over and yes, we will crack on with this then. But before we do that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, there is the YouTube thank you button. There is the YouTube Pony Club. There is the Buy Me Coffee link. And of course, the Patreon down below as well. And of course, yesterday, it was the Pony Club video today for the Pony Clubbers and of course, the Patreon members as well. So like I say, go check that out. And of course, if you do join it, there is a ton of content that I've now made there. I think we're up to like 51, 52 videos that we've made all about a ton of different stuff. So like I say, go check that out as well. So as always, Thank you very much to all those people who do help support the channel. Even if you do, just click the like and share button. And of course, as always, thank you very much for all the support that you do show the channel. So let's crack on into this then. As always, this comes, as we said, comes from Conservative Home with the title of the CPTPP. Badnoch's signature, Sunak's government, Johnson's policy. So let's see what Will had to say about this policy, or at least joining this trade bloc. So, the UK's ascension to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP, which we're going to call the Pacific Partnership just for easiness, because CPTPP is just a mouthful. It's just easier to call it the Pacific Partnership. Will delight the enthusiast for a post-Brexit pursuit of global Britain. And as we said, this whole different direction that they wanted to take of global Britain versus the whole leveling up agenda, it didn't matter, because if you pursue one, you completely undermine the other. And to be honest, they were always gunning for global Britain, and they didn't even, to be honest, bother with leveling up. So I guess we knew which policy won out in the end. So, while some claiming it means that we can never rejoin the European Union, an obvious fantasy when the pact has a 6-month exit clause, and it refutes any claim that leaving the EU marked a turn towards protectionism. And again, I want to remind people that Brexiteers were saying that when we left the EU, this would be an obvious turn towards protectionism, and that, we would protect British businesses and invest in the UK. That was the whole leveling up agenda. And it all comes back to those two competing agendas, that they could not both sustain each other. And it's very obvious that the whole global Britain argument won in the Conservative Party, that was the way that they wanted to go. And it will have, I think, a lot of negative effects, because a lot of people who voted Brexit really did want to see a return of things like British manufacturing and investment into jobs here in the UK. So, but into, of course, the admissions here, of course, from Will. So one should not be shy from admitting that any major short-term gains from our ascension are primarily political. Exactly. They are. I've said this before. We are only there because Japan wants us there to say no to China when if they make an application to join. That's the only reason we are there. They don't care about any of the trade. They don't care about anything else. And as we've covered before, from most of the sources in Asia, there has been no fantastic fanfare that we are joining this pact, and they have incredibly low expectations. And the other thing that was worth pointing out is no one in Asia is taking this Pacific Partnership, a whole thing, very seriously at all. So back to it. So we already have trade agreements with 9 of those current 11 members, and most of those are rollover deals, while we are trying to negotiate new deals to see if those in place. And bear in mind, the one we signed with Japan ain't better than the one we had with the EU at all. But there you go. Joining largely gives us access to goods markets in Malaysia and Brunei, hence why the government estimates that it will only boost the UK's GDP by 0.08%, or 1.8 billion a year. Actually gets that wrong. That's 1.8 billion not over a year, but over 15 years. So that is a wrong statistic there. I've got to call you out for that, Will. But nevertheless, as Stephen Booth has pointed out, the Pacific Partnership's existing population of over 500 million or so already matches the EU's. But of course, here's the thing. That 500 million is over on the far side of the world. It's not on our doorstep. Distance in trade matters. Not only that, but the average wealth that someone has in the EU versus that in the Pacific Partnership is really only going to be matched by people in Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, and Canada, because they're in it as well. So that's really only 4 countries that can really, shall we say, afford to buy the stuff that we make. While on the other side of this is going to cause, I think, a lot of these Pacific companies, now that the tariffs are gone, to really question them remaining in the UK. You're not going to see investment from these Pacific countries come to the UK. Instead, you're going to see the exact opposite. Um, they all these Pacific countries have expected and want investment from the UK, and that's not going to benefit people here in the UK, and that will mean job losses as well. Um, and of course, it's expected to grow in the next few decades, just as the EU's is expected to shrink under 400 million. Over the next coming decade, the world's center of geopolitical and economic gravity will shift towards the Asia Pacific, and the UK is getting in there first. Um, doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. There's this whole thing about, yeah, that is true that it is sort of shifting, but we're not in the Asia Pacific. You know, it doesn't matter that we, quote, got there first, because that's just not how international trade works. Distance in international trade still matters. The EU is still going to be on our doorstep. It's still going to be easier and quicker to get things from the EU, not the Asia Pacific. Whereas you are going to be seeing, certainly, um, especially in terms of sort of production, manufacturing. Well, if you're an Asia Pacific country, why have a manufacturing base in the UK? Makes sense to have one in the EU because of the EU rules and regulations, which again help to protect, keep companies and businesses in the UK, or sorry, in the EU, not the you know, not as here in the UK, which we don't. That's going to have big consequences. And I said before, and I'll always say this: the big two things that the UK public are going to wake up to, certainly the importance of regulations, and of course the impact of signing trade deals and what that actually means, because we haven't really seen that for years, because we've been very much in the EU, and the EU is protectionist. As we've said, there's nothing really bad about being protectionist, because at the end of the day, that has meant that us being in the EU has meant that jobs and companies stay here in the UK. That's not the case anymore. There's just this morning, there was the whole thing about, oh, Jaguar Land Rover and Tata building a big battery factory in Somerset, I think it was. The UK wasn't their first choice. The UK, let's make this clear, the UK was not their first choice. It was Spain. They were going to go to Spain. The only reason they ended up choosing there was because the UK went, here's all these subsidies, here's all this stuff. Please build your factory in the UK. And of course, they did it because they went, okay, you've given us a reason to be there. But that means now that future governments are basically going to be held hostage by these companies. And trust me, companies do use this all the time. A classic example is in my own hometown, Hermes. Recently, Barnsley Council has built this new big industrial estate, and Hermes, again, very big international supplier, put a massive advert in the local paper about how they were coming to Barnsley, about how they're going to build all this stuff. And the thing is, the council was set up to reject them because they didn't want to have them there, because it would be almost too much reliance. They wanted sort of more small, medium companies, not a big giant like Hermes, who could, well, exert a lot of their own business power on this estate. And because of that, and because of that big advert they put in the Barnsley Chronicle, they had to relent and actually accept them. Businesses will throw their weight around politically. So that in itself will have its own downfalls as well. So, and as good as it is to have those jobs here, you've got to represent the other side of it. Well, what if you don't want to give those subsidies, or what again, we still don't know fully what the package the government has given to Tata and Jaguar Land Rover, so we don't know exactly what they've offered. But We'll probably find out soon. So back to it. So it also provides the UK with a seat at the table as the international trade rules are rewritten and reshaped to encompass the 21st century. It doesn't at all. It doesn't at all. This is one of the big things that I've seen some people crow about. Oh, the UK has a seat at the international table. We are a tiny market when it comes to the international table. And as Will has already said, if the center of geopolitical and economic gravity is shifting towards the Asia Pacific, why are they going to listen to the UK? If that is the case, and we now have a seat to help shape those international trade rules, but the whole center of the world's geopolitical and economic gravity is shifting towards the Asia Pacific, why are they going to listen to us? It doesn't make sense. So it extends the commitment to the regional, it extends to the region that we demonstrated through the AUKUS deal, and at the point where Americans' bipartisan consensus is to move away from free trade, it positions Britain as the quote the foremost global opponent to growing tariff barriers. As we've said before, it's not just the America that has shifted with this consensus to move away from quote free trade. Everyone is still open to sort of free trade and removing tariff barriers, but a lot of people are realizing, especially in America, that their overzealousness from people who have sold and been free market fundamentalists have realized that this has damaged their their job prospects in the country, is damaged their own manufacturing capabilities. So as such, they are now having to recognize that, oh, actually, protectionism isn't as dirty word as these free market fundamentalists have figured out. That is happening all over the world. There is a massive shift away from this all go guns blazing free trade fundamentalists. And at a time when global tariffs are already incredibly low, it doesn't really set us as the foremost global opponent to growing tariffs when global tariffs are already at a record level low. And once again, why are they going to listen to us? Why is the world going to listen to the UK? The UK is not a big market. We are a minnow really shifting in a far bigger place. We are a middle economy. That is something that especially people like Will and all the rest of these conservatives are going to have to get used to. We are we are a middle of the road economy. We are a middle political power. But people like Will and all these other conservatives seem to treat us that's not how we are anymore. But that is the reality that we have done, and we are going to find out very quickly. So, from a perspective of a quote global Britain enthusiast, that all sounds smashing, especially if Britain's accession provides further cover for the bloc to reject China's application, which again is the only reason why we are there. But having previously expressed my skepticism about the concept, it'd be remiss of me to be welcoming joining the Pacific Partnership with open arms. And again, it's going to have massive problems. It's going to have massive, massive problems about this. It is not a good trade deal for us to join. It destroys many of the big key promises that Brexiteers brought, especially the sovereignty one. Like I say, I'm going to love it when we start having to take, rules from the Pacific Partnership and see that the Brexiteers have nothing to say about that, because I thought that was the whole reason for Brexit in the first place. But there you go. So, whilst I carry no torch for Beijing, the idea that Britain will play a major role in any future conflict with China is an absurdist fantasy. At least I'm glad that he admits that. Our two aircraft carriers, as ill-defended and unwieldy as they are, would only last a day or so if asked to defend Taiwan against a Chinese hypersonic assault. Since the sinking of the Prince of Wales and the repulse, we have not been a serious Pacific power. Exactly. This whole shift that we had to the Asia Pacific, very much put forward by Boris and Truss, as soon as the Ukraine invasion kicked off, they all realized, oh, actually, we really our focus should be really on once again on Europe, and it sort of blew out the whole arguments in and around Brexit once again. But there you go. By all means, keep China out of our infrastructure, our industries, and universities. But don't pretend that we can influence it any more than we can. At least I'm glad that he admits that. Whilst joining the Pacific Partnership, maybe putting down a marker for our Pacific ambitions, it will be one that we will struggle to actually match with stagnant growth, crumbling armed forces, and political inconsistency. Well, again, I've said before, just because this is a fast growing area, as he's already said at the start of this article, doesn't mean that that growth is somehow going to come here, or at least be influenced in by the UK. Just because we are tied to this fast growth area doesn't mean that's going to, the UK is suddenly going to take off in that, fast growth balloon as well. That's not how it works. But there you go. Once again, Brexiteers misunderstanding a whole how international trade works. There you go. So it is an inconsistency that is especially obvious in the case of our ascension to the Pacific Partnership and global Britain and free trade. China's skepticism are all postures that one would have associated in more recent memory with Boris Johnson and Liz Truss over Rishi Sunak. And then, of course, Kimmy Badnoch gets to announce it as a consequence of a recent round of ministerial press of past the parcel rather than her own efforts. And that's sort of very true as well. The Pacific Partnership is not Kimmy Badnoch's idea. It was one that Liz Truss and Boris Johnson wanted to do because, again, oh wow, isn't that a fantastic Brexit benefit? Sunak, of course, is quieter on global Britain than his two predecessors. As Eris Ronson has highlighted, the Prime Minister's foreign policy marks a very retreat in scope, focus from their internationalist ambitions. The 2023 refresh of the 2021 Integrated Review deadens the latter's focus on the Indo-Pacific and re-emphasis on Britain's regional role. Because again, that's what we are. If anything, we are at least a regional power, not a world power, as many Brexiteers seem to cast us as. And of course, its role, primary, the protection of undersea infrastructure. Alongside this, James Cleverly has toned down Truss's very hawkish approach to China, while Sunak, as I have argued, is still interested in free trade. His approach is rather less louder than his predecessors. He has of yet shown very little enthusiasm for following Joe Biden and the European Union in its slide towards protectionism. And here's the thing, this whole thing about, slide towards protectionism. Again, all this is going, we are going to protect jobs here in our country, and we're going to make sure that the industries of the future get built here. And yeah, as I've said before, protectionism by people like Will, by these free market fundamentalists, is treated as a dirty word without really understanding what protectionism really is and what about it really means. But of course, it is clear that trade deals of this kind are not his first priority. Again, even if we were to sign a free trade deal with America, it wouldn't be fantastic. It would be giving up a lot, and I mean a lot of sovereignty, because there is no way that we gain any kind of good trade deal with America, considering how small a market we really are compared to their size. Yeah. They'd have our breakfast before we got any of ours. So, making it easier to trade with a group of countries that the government expects to produce, quote, at least 50% of global growth between now and 2035. Again, none of that growth is going to come here. Most of these things, as we said before, most of these countries in the Pacific Partnership are developing economies, and that's what they are, developing economies. Currently, their growth chart is like that because they are a developing economy. Eventually, it will flatline because, well, they will have developed their economy. But there you go, and that's why they are complaining so much about being the EU, because the EU and most of the countries in the European Union are fully developed, advanced economies. There's very little you can really do to develop your economy at such a speed. Um, of course, once again, misunderstanding growth, global trade, etc. Of course, hallmark of Brexiteers. He continues, it is never to be sniffed at, but one suspects, again, it should be, because as we said, that growth ain't going to come here, as we said before. Whereas one suspects that Badenoch's insistence that we, quote, don't use it, the argument that the lack of growth will become a self-fulfilling prophecy is directed as much at number 10 as it is to any declinists in the Foreign Office. I've said this before, this is going to have big consequences, and I think a lot of people very soon are going to think very negatively of the Pacific Partnership, because it really doesn't kick in at least until next year. That's if, again, all the countries agree to the UK's ascension. Like I say, as we said before, Canada and certainly New Zealand have a lot to say about some of our regulations that they want lowering. So that's going to be fun when we see that. Certainly, as we've said before, those secret courts are going to be fun when we start to see the government admit that, yeah, actually, we've been sued by these other corporations in these other countries, and we've had to sort of lower our regulations, or else again they'll just sue us again and again and again and again. Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to see the public's reaction to the Pacific Partnership, and like I say, leaving the Pacific Partnership is incredibly easy. We just have to give 6 months notice, and that's it. And we're out. It's not like we've seen with the EU. We have to go through all these like negotiations and things like that. No, it's just 6 month notice. You're out. That's it. So, yeah, I fully expect, certainly in the future, the public's opinion on the Pacific Partnership to be incredibly bad. Because it will have lots of very negative consequences on our economy, on jobs here. Like I say, these Pacific Partnership countries, well, if you've got zero tariffs, well, why build any factories here in the UK anymore? You might as well just import it even cheaper. And like I say, pay your workers back in your home country peanuts. In cases of like Malaysia and Brunei, like I say, they've got next to no workers' rights over there in those countries. So yeah, it's not going to be, I think, in a couple of years' time, be seen as a positive as us being in the Pacific Partnership, because as I've said before, trade deals, especially around the world, are big politics, and we haven't really engaged in that type of stuff before. So, I look forward to the massive movements that we see of us trying to leave the Pacific Partnership probably start to grow once we start to see the consequences of us joining pacts like this and what some of the stuff in the Pacific Partnership means. And it's going to see fun, certainly Brexiteers and the global Brexiteers try to defend some of the things that are in the Pacific Partnership, as they currently, as we said, being very, very quiet about some of the things that are in the Pacific Partnership, especially those international courts, and of course, having to accept lower international standards, even though ours might be higher. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, please remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button, and of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.